Amir Or, I want to welcome you to the Meacham Conversations, and I thought we might begin by having you perhaps read a poem.
Okay. Well, I'm delighted to be here for the Meacham program, and the poem I'll read to you is a poem about language itself from my book Day. Language says, before language stands a language. Language is traces stained by over there. Language says, listen, now. You listen, here was echo. Take silence and try to be silent. Take the words and try to speak. Beyond language, language is a wound from which the world flows and flows. Language says, is not. Is not. Language says, I. Language says, come on, let's speak you. Let's handle you. Come on, say you have said.
That's terrific, thank you. It's interesting that the idea of language there is not so much for the meaning, but what language can do. Its force, its power. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about that sense of language that you have.
Well, the poem speaks about this moment of inspiration when you don't really know if you speak the poem or the poem speaks you. But it's also about something that happens to all of us, that language functions as a filter through which we understand reality, through which we experience reality. If you don't have a word for something, it doesn't practically exist for you. And when you have a word, a specific word, it has its own color and it shapes your reality. If you speak English and if you speak Hebrew, you don't experience the same reality, you know. And this goes, politically, socially, in every sense.
Yeah, there's a sense in which, in some ways, I've been interested in this language theory where the idea that language can control the way that you think. And of course, politicians use this all the time. But it's interesting that I think that the poet, in a way, tries to subvert that power of the common, the social way of thinking, and tries to get at a unique perspective through the language.
Well, this is true. I mean, language is the great teacher of any poet, and it's the instrument through which we create art. But creating art is not just creating art. You see, you look at a poet, he does nothing, he's sitting, thinking, no action is there. But inside, he creates a reality, which he translates into language, in a way. And even the most minor poet is quite subversive in the sense that he creates a new reality, a new tomorrow, a new way of looking at things. And in that sense, he has a message.
Do you think there's a sense in which the language not only is the idea is translated into the language, or the feeling is translated into the language, but a sense that the language actually, in a sense, creates a kind of reality in itself?
Yeah, I agree. It goes both ways. I mean, if I think in Hebrew, the reality that I will suggest is already influenced and shaped by Hebrew. Yeah, that's true too. And but there are basic things that are biological or emotional in our relationship that maybe are prior to language. It's hard to say to draw the line, but it's true. It goes both ways.
Yeah. The next phase of thinking about that is the way in which language then can act in a larger sense in the world. In other words, actually poetry. And I wonder what political role you think poetry can have in the world.
I think in the same sense that I talked about creating a new tomorrow, a new way of, a new reality, a new vision, that's something that the poet still has to offer. We don't have here witch doctors or prophets, but poets in a way take this role, because often when you write, there is a bigger self, that's a bigger you, that goes there and has some message to convey. And this message is not just like facts. It goes deep into the music into the psyche, into the emotions of people that are there to receive it, if it really works. You know, it hits, it resonate really deep. Yeah. And I think the influence is far-reaching. Sometimes it go for generations, as we know. Yeah.
Yes. I wonder if you think that, I mean, you travel a great deal, and you've been to many conferences and readings in dozens and dozens of countries around the world. I wonder if the bits and pieces of language that you pick up at these other countries has influenced your own language and your own sense of how a poem works.
Well, I think they do. I think they do. First of all, if you speak more than one language, or if you try even to write in more than one language, even a little bit, immediately this idea that language shapes reality becomes real to you. It's not a theory. Yeah? And of course, you can pick all kinds of concepts and, let's say, areas of feelings that you didn't know you could feel that exist in another language. You know, sometimes it's really extreme. You know, in Japanese, you have like experiences for not being able to move. It's called kanashibari. Now, in Japan, people experience kanashibari. In Israel, they don't. You know, the language opens new channels of experience, and this is fantastic, really. Maybe it's a kind of a suggestion. Maybe language works as a hypnotist would work with you, you know, giving you suggestions.
I think it would follow too that then for a reader of poetry, especially somebody who has traveled a lot and has these different influences, there's a way in which one culture can begin to understand another culture too. And this, I think, is also the value of translation per se.
Definitely, because I think any art is a dialogue, and when you can bridge something through language, the reader in another language, via translation, will respond to it with his own reality, and in a way will enrich the poem, because the poem is not something static. It's something that happens between the reader and the poem, and it's different each time. Even if you read the poem in 10 years, it's another poem.
Absolutely, yeah. I wonder, in what sense you think that that the education of William Wordsworth has this saying that the poet has to create the audience by which he's going to be enjoyed, understood. And how much of a role do you think the poet has in creating that audience through the poems?
Well, I think he has a crucial role, because again, it's a dialogue, and I can decide what kind of dialogue, because I can decide that my reader should read first Schopenhauer and I don't know, the Britannica, and you know, if we're going to exaggerate, and you name what, the Bible, whatever, and I can say no. I want a reader that will understand me just like when I go to the supermarket and I talk to the cashier. He will understand me just with the same effort. Both are possible. Normally it's somewhere in the middle, of course, but it's the decision, whether conscious or not, of the poet. I think the challenge of a poet that a poet has is not how difficult he makes it for the reader, or how perfect his poetry should be in the sense of individually his individual voice, but how little he compromises for communication and still keeps his own unique voice. But communication is essential. I think if you do art for art's sake, this is not art really, this is a diary. It means art for self-satisfaction, not for dialogue.
Well, this raises again the problem in translation, in the sense of somebody reads, say, one of your poems as an English reader that you wrote in Hebrew first. Right. What are we missing? What's the best solution? Should somebody read the translation by one translator and maybe another translator and a third translator, and look at the differences and see, maybe what Or is getting at is something that's not any one of those three, but something a little bit that's hidden in English but available in the original?
Well, the best way is to learn Hebrew. but yeah, but whatever is lost in translation, you cannot figure it out. You can do it only by literary translation and explaining that each, let's say, this word means this and this and that, because words in Hebrew can have few meanings, whereas the English slices the world very thin, and you have a word for everything. If we talk about these two languages, and Hebrew can have multiple meanings. The logic of Hebrew is the logic of, let's say, symbol and metaphor. For example, if I want to say painted, it's tzavua. If I want to say hypocrite, it's again tzavua, because the hypocrite has a painted face. And many words function like this.
Metaphor.
Yeah, it goes from the concrete to the more and more abstract. Abstract itself is a word like this. Abstract and stripped off, without cloth, it's the same word, because it's stripped of materiality. So I can't do it in English. I can't do it in English. I have to compromise or be creative. And sometimes, when the translator has poetic capabilities, he does very well. It's not the same poem. It's not the same poem, but it's something else that is quite fair.
Yeah, Brodsky says that poetry is what is gained in translation, not what is lost in translation.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.